So let's talk about a universe where all the heroes die, but Peter Parker gets a happy life with MJ and their daughter Annie. So we see Pete sitting at a dinner table with his wife and daughter. Now, MJ notes that Spider-Man's patrols keep getting longer and longer, and they have a daughter now, and if anything, he should be taking more time off. He tells her it's really weird. Here recently, he's having to pick up a lot of slack. He's having to fight Daredevil's villains, the Iron Fist, some of Moon Knight's. It's like these guys have just quit fighting. Pete, of course, is going to capitalize on this. I mean, the family needs money, so he runs to the Bugle with pictures of Spider-Man fighting everyone else's villains. And while they talk about the missing vigilantes, Ben Urich says missing is putting it lightly. Now, Pete takes off to go to Avengers Mansion, hoping to get some answers and find out exactly what's going on, only to be surprised when he finds out that the rest of the heroes are already there meeting too. Cap's debriefing everybody and tells them that everybody with powers has gone missing and all the non-powered heroes are showing up dead. Now, due to some intel from Black Widow, Cap believes the culprit behind this is Augustus Roman, the CEO of Empire Unlimited. They specialize in superhuman abilities and biotech. The Avengers spring into action quickly to go take down Roman before he can do any more damage, but before they leave, they hear news of Rikers Island having a huge breakout. And if everybody has escaped from Rikers, that means one thing, that Eddie Brock has escaped too. So while the Avengers head one way, Spider-Man rushes home. Upon arrival, finds his worst nightmare, Venom holding his wife and child. Now Pete flies at Venom, hitting him as hard as he can with one punch. Something he's never attempted before. He shatters all the bones in his hand, but he doesn't care. He just keeps swinging away. He keeps hitting as hard as he can, screaming for MJ and Annie to get the hell out of there. While this is going on, the Avengers are all dying at the hands of Augustus Roman in his new suit going by the name Regent. See, with his biotechnology, he was able to create a suit that could hijack the powers of any superhuman, and he's already stolen all the powers of the X-Men. Now, this isn't MJ's first rodeo. She takes Annie, and seeing a fire truck going nearby, she knows there's two things that symbiotes hate: fire and loud sounds. Of course, catching a little bit of a break, this doesn't stop Venom from taking off right behind him. Pete heads off to take down Brock. He takes one final look up at the tower where the Avengers are having their last stand. Now, as the fire trucks stop at the burning building, MJ hops off the back of the truck and begs the firemen to blast their sirens as loud as they can. And while it's not going to kill him, the sirens are enough to stop Venom in his tracks, giving Pete a chance to catch up and kick the shit out of him. Hitting Venom as hard as he can, he keeps pushing him back into the burning building. His muscles are screaming in pain. His fists are nothing but empty sacks of meat, but he keeps fighting because above all that, he hears the cries of his little girl. Venom's taunting Pete, telling him that he's never going to stop. Even if he beats him this time, he will always come after his daughter. As MJ screaming, telling Peter that the building's empty, he does what he thought he never would. The building already on the brink of collapse, Spider-Man grabs one of the main support beams and begins to tear it out. Pete was able to get away from this falling debris just in time, and as he makes it to MJ and Annie, she asks if he's dead. As we see Eddie Brock's hand sticking up from a burning pile of rubble, him and the symbiote both pass, and Spider-Man says, "I did what I had to do." And that was the day that all the heroes died. Every last one of them, including Spider-Man. We fast forward years into the future and we see Pete talk about his new responsibility. As the Vulture goes flying by overhead, Pete pays him no mind and just tells his little girl to be safe while they're crossing the street. See, because since the day that Regent took control and killed all of the superheroes, Pete has hung up the tights. He's no longer Spider-Man, and while it's not a perfect world, he can take care of him and his. So, this doesn't stop the guilt from keeping Pete up at night. He awakes with night terrors of the night that he killed Eddie Brock. And his little girl keeps having nightmares of that night too, as Pete runs down the hall and finds Annie attached to the ceiling. He's upset because she broke her power inhibitor because, you know, ever since Regent took control, not only could he steal anyone's powers, but he can scan for them as well. And with the chip in her bracelet broken, Annie's in danger of being taken away. So we see Pete and MJ talking about how they're going to come up with money, and then all of a sudden a bunch of police cars go flying by, so naturally Pete takes off after them, only this time not in a red and blue suit, but a taxi cab. He shows up and harmlessly takes pictures as Regent's team of supervillains turned police force are taking down the superpowered individual D-Man. Pete's not the only one watching, as a couple of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents stand nearby in the shadows asking their director if they should step in and try and save D-Man. Which of course he's not worth the risk, so the director tells him to stand down and let Regent have this one. Pete heads back to the Bugle to sell his pictures to Jonah, only now he gets paid for them not to be published. Now, Regent wouldn't want people thinking they live in some harsh totalitarian society. And while this does disgust Pete, things go from bad to worse when he hears of an assault on a school, but not just any school, the school that Annie Mae goes to. It turns out that they found a superpowered kid there, so Pete pulls the drawstrings on his hoodie as tight as he can and takes off rushing to go save his daughter. Now, he arrives and begins fighting off Regent's forces, but it turns out Annie wasn't in trouble at all, as they had actually discovered the power pack. While Pete fights so that the kids have a chance at getting away, Annie stands in awe at the sheer power of her father. MJ scoops Annie up and the power pack kids get away, but the only problem now is Spidey's identity is blown. People know that he's back. Even though they couldn't capture him, they report the news to Regent, who decides to send his most elite squad after him, the Sinister Six. Meanwhile, back at their apartment, MJ pulls out the black suit and hands it to Pete, telling him he's gonna have to stick to the shadows. While the sight of this symbiote-looking costume scares his daughter, Pete assures her that that monster is long gone. He got rid of it years ago, because that's what daddies do. They keep their family safe. Now, we see all the power that Regent is draining and holding inside of his body, but he stresses how badly he needs the wall-crawler spider sense. Meanwhile, Spidey's just trying to buy inhibitor chips so he can make sure he can hide his little girl. But unfortunately for him, the Sinister Six arrive. More like unfortunately for them, as Otto Octavius has showed up, and turns out he's replaced all of his limbs with robotic limbs. Not only that, but they're connected to his nervous system so he can feel them. And Pete, not playing games anymore, rips them off one by one. Now, Kraven can smell the fear and the anger inside Spider-Man and realizes that he's not just fighting for himself, he's fighting like a man possessed. He's fighting like a lion trying to protect his cub, and if you can find the child, you'll find Spider-Man. Now, after Pete successfully got his inhibitor chips, we see MJ putting Annie Mae to bed, where she's listening to J. Jonah Jameson go on about how her dad is a menace. And MJ explains to her daughter that that couldn't be further from the truth, that her dad was a hero and maybe the best of them all. Now, with a sample of her DNA, Pete's able to get Annie's bracelet working again so that he could hide her powers, but it's going to get put to the test the next day. Regent comes on TV and explains that at Annie's school tomorrow morning, every student will be getting a mandatory screening. Oh, and one more thing, every student's parents must come with them. Now, Pete, being the genius that he is, knew his bracelets were going to work, and him and Annie passed through the screening fine. Unfortunately, another little kid wasn't so lucky. Pete goes to take off and get his daughter to safety when she tells him to stop. Pete says that she's right, that his daughter deserves to live in a world full of heroes, as MJ says we all do. Pete first gets the Hobgoblin, causing one of his bombs to explode and him to go crashing into a statue. The crowd looks on in awe as they look up and see Spider-Man standing over the head and says, "Hobgoblin, ladies and gentlemen, can we give him a hand?" He says, "Oh, it's not funny? Good. I'm done being funny." This isn't his first rodeo. Pete's taking on the Sinister Six by himself, but Annie is begging her mom to let her help. While they're talking, the two get snatched up by agents, portaled away from their father and husband. Man shows up and explains that they're with S.H.I.E.L.D. and that he is too, and he needs Spider-Man to come with him, but of course Pete isn't buying any of it. And in the time it takes for him and Flint to argue back and forth, Regent has shown up to claim his final prize of Spider-Man. Now, Annie and MJ were being kept safely at the S.H.I.E.L.D. base, where she was still begging her mom to use her powers. And upon hearing about Annie's inhibitor bracelet, Clint Barton, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., realizes that Pete might have the answer to everything here. He might have the key to defeating Regent. He takes the technology in the bracelet and gives it to Jonathan Ohm, who crafts it into an arrowhead for Clint. See, all he has to do is shoot this inhibitor into Regent, get a sample of his DNA inside the arrow, and then the inhibitor will kick in and take all of his powers away. The plan has to move quickly, as Pete's powers are already being drained, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. base they're staying in is under attack from Regent's forces. Annie's finally forced to spring into action. She throws on her costume she put together and starts attacking her father's villains. Having his powers and none of his holdback, and not caring to fight dirty, she does pretty damn good. That's Boomerang. She claws the Shocker's eyes out. She kicks Kraven where the sun doesn't shine and screams that she's a menace just like her dad. Now, Sandman had a little trick up his sleeve. He had one of the Spot's portals stowed away inside of him. Opens it up and shows the S.H.I.E.L.D. team a message saying this is how you get to Regent, and he has Spider-Man. Annie Mae and MJ team up with this newfound team of Avengers, take off after them to go save Peter. Now, Regent goes to take the Avengers head on, while the Parkers go to look for Peter. Now, while he's easily wiping the floor with this non-powered group of Avengers, all they need to be is a distraction so that Hawkeye can shoot the inhibitor arrow into the back of Regent. Only when he fires it, Regent catches the arrow in midair and snaps it, saying it was all thanks to his Spidey sense. As well as his powers, his life force is being drained too, and as he is dying, Pete's seeing his whole life flash before his eyes. Now, he always assumed in this moment he'd see a big blur of fists and bullets, but that's not the case at all. All he really saw was the stuff that mattered. Loves and losses, first kisses and last goodbyes, and his family. While the Avengers are getting slammed by Regent, Annie Mae and MJ headed in a different direction, and they went straight to the lab. They found out that while Pete's spider sense was being taken by Regent, he had no use for his strength, so they just sent it into a different prototype suit, one that MJ finds and puts on for herself. And while she's suiting up, Annie gets to tearing the tubes apart, which supply Regent with his powers while she's looking for her dad. But Regent comes flying through, busting the wall down and screaming about who would dare to mess with his powers. MJ, with nothing more more than a suit with some of her husband's strength uploaded into it, tells her daughter to run, as she's willing to give her life to protect her. All this screaming has caught Peter's attention. As he's about to fade away, he looks up and sees his wife and daughter in danger. While he doesn't have the great power anymore, he barely has any strength. He feels all of these emotions, love, anger, fear, all at once, so much stronger than any actual power that he needed. Fueled by all of this emotion, he musters up what strength he has left and busts out of his container. Hits Regent so hard the two go flying out of the building. MJ begins to destroy the rest of the tanks, taking away some of Regent's power and trying to give her husband an upper hand. Instead of helping her mom, Annie realizes that her dad might die out there and takes off to go help him fight. Now Clint tries to stop her from jumping, but she takes a full leap off the building and hits Regent in the back with everything that she has, and all of a sudden, his suit and powers begin to fade away. It turns out Clint had handed her what was left of the inhibitor arrow right before she jumped. Now even with all of his powers gone, Regent's body is still enhanced. The Parker family, all three team up and make pretty quick work of him. That is until Annie gets a little too cocky, gets a little too careless, and gets grabbed by the throat. Regent tells them all that he needs a spider sense, that they're crazy for stopping him, and he's the only hope against Doom. This is taking place during Secret Wars, where Dr. Doom had created Battleworld, if you couldn't tell. Now Pete, desperate to save his daughter, grabs a broken piece of metal off of MJ's suit and slowly starts approaching Regent. He offers him his own power as long as Regent takes Annie and just keeps her safe. Tells her to feed her, take care of her, give her allowance, but of course you have to pay her in spider sense. A lot of reasons that Pete always tells jokes when he's fighting. It centers him, it calms civilians, and it rattles his opponents. Sometimes even when he can get them to laugh, they squint their eyes, they tilt their head back, obscuring their vision and exposing their jugular. At this time, to save his daughter, Pete just knocks Regent out. He hugs Annie and tells her not to be scared, because he could still save the day. He could save his daughter without having to kill, without having to sacrifice his morals and who he is. And at least in this universe, in this part of Battleworld, Pete gets to live happily ever after, for now.